Good afternoon and welcome back from lunch. Although we are waiting for people to join, in the interest of time, we're going to get started and allow colleagues to join. Whenever you're done. Now, we're continuing with mini grids, but then trying to focus a bit more on hydropower. And historically, you know that hydropower has been used for thousands of years, starting with the Romans in 4th century BC, at least for mechanical power. But what's increasingly happening, and you probably saw from the IRENA report, which was presented today, that the rate of growth of hydropower has been second. I would say like a distant second to what's been happening with the solar mini grids. So if you look at the numbers which I'm borrowing from IRENA, the solar power over the last 10 years, the mini grids grew by something like 30,000%, although it started from a very small base. Whereas the hydro growth has been only 20% or so. This despite being the fact that hydro is considered to be the most cost effective in terms of dollars per kilowatt hours, and probably there's much more experience over hundreds of years on hydroelectricity. So there are some challenges. Of course, you can say that the solar resource is much more widely available, and the business models are much newer than the ones in hydro. So there seems to be some scope for, I would say, some introspection and reflection as to what might be lacking in terms of the hydro mini grid particular models, specifically in terms of the business models, the bankability and the financial viability. So this is something that we as a group, the Hydropower Empowerment Group, has been mulling about, and what we want to do here is to present some perspectives from our practitioners here. And those of you who do not know, HPNET is a platform for hydropower practitioners to exchange their views around policy, regulation, technical issues, business models, and finance increasingly. And something which unites all of us is really our interest in renewable energy, and in particular for hydropower. So that's why we are here. What we're going to do today, the structure is that we're going to present two very interesting cases from two of the countries where HPNET is active, starting with Nepal, a private sector initiative, which is probably one of the good examples of how a hydropower project mini grid can be run over a longer period of time. And we're going to go to a cooperative model in Myanmar as well. And then we're going to open it up to our panelists who will come with their own perspectives from different angles on this particular issue. And then what I'm going to hope is that we'll have a bit more of an audience. We'll open it up to an audience for some of your questions and reflections, and then we'll try to conclude. So that's the plan. Bikash probably needs no introduction, but he's here as the Director of Clean Energy at Windrock. And Bikash, having seen these models, a private sector model, cooperative model, a lot of similarities, and now, we do have similar approaches elsewhere also, but we are not finding the same level of success which is sustained over a longer period like BAPAC or so. So what are the key factors that are making micro-hydro-based mini-grids bankable or financially viable? And is there a role for ownership structures and some of these management structures that we're talking about?
Thank you, Vinod. I often think of microhydro as naturally overcoming the two big barriers of mini grids that we've been talking about all day. One is, the mini grid tariffs are high, and therefore productive uses are difficult to sustain, and hydro automatically, is one of the least expensive sources of generation, mainly because both the projects you saw are run of river, there's no batteries involved, and so the tariff, can be quite close to the grid tariff. The one challenge, of course, is that these are off-grid systems. They cannot sell all the energy that they produce. So this is why governments often justify providing a 50% subsidy. If you compare two investors, one that is generating hydro for the grid and one that is generating hydro for a village, the grid IPP can sell all the energy they produce. And the village IPP, can only at best sell about half, because the village load is not a 24-hour constant load. And so if you want to give the developer the same returns at a similar tariff, there is justification for providing some subsidy to that off-grid developer. So it's a very simple, straightforward justification. The other beautiful part of this is that when the grid does arrive, it's not a threat, because that other 50% of the energy that couldn't have been sold in the village can be sold now to the grid. So, it's a perfect match. Segways should be painless. I mean, not that utilities love to buy from small producers, that's a different problem. But just in terms of the economics of it, it's a very natural technology where resources exist. So once you solve those two problems, it seems to me it's a no-brainer, that those of us who are in the business of promoting mini-grids, we should exhaust hydro as much as possible. I mean, of course, many places don't have hydro resources, and biomass and solar mini-grids are equally important. But where hydro does exist, it makes perfect sense that these things should be developed. I think one way hydro harms itself is that many of the hydro projects are not charging the full commercial tariff that they should charge. I mean, it's kind of the opposite problem of many of the solar mini-grids. Solar mini-grids charge a lot because it's a private operator, they need to recoup costs, they've got loans, etc. Hydro, because the resource is owned by the community, the rivers go through the communities, it doesn't just belong to one person, you need that community ownership. Oftentimes the micro hydro is also owned by user groups. And user groups are very reluctant to charge the full cost. And what that means is that there's not much incentive to really push for productive uses to increase revenue. The tariffs are low. So anybody that goes and evaluates these hydro systems finds that the IRR is extremely low. And which is why, these programs are constantly going back to donors to ask for more money. And that's why these programs don't expand. So I think it's really important that these things be run in a commercially viable way. The tariffs should charge cost recovery kind of rates, at least to the point where the people who are operating these systems feel some pressure to really push for productive uses. You look at what Bitbarger is doing. He's selling his electricity at high rates to the cell towers. They can pay a lot, they need 24-hour reliable power. He does that. But he has a baker in his village who only needs the power after midnight. He's selling it to him at 1/3 of the rate. So as an entrepreneur, he's got the incentives aligned so that, he's charging the right people the right tariffs. He optimizes the use of his energy. Even doing all of that, I mean, his plant factor is still about 50%. That's just the nature of hydro. But, so I think it's still justified he got that 48% subsidy. But for the remainder where he put in his own money, he's got reasonable tariff, he's got 6 mills in his village, he's got a lot of things going on because he pushes for that. You see a lot of community managed hydro that don't have the investment into social mobilization and support from an NGO and others, where people just basically run these as subsistence systems. And I think they do a disservice to the sector because it's very difficult to prove financial viability. So I think it's a challenge for the hydro mini-grid community to say, look, I mean, it seems like it's a nice thing to do to charge low tariff and, people get by with charging 1 cent, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. It seems nice, but you're harming yourself as a sector. I think that's why the sector is not attracting the kind of investments solar mini-grids are attracting.
Thanks very much, Prakash. Very insightful as always, and very smart points. You're one of the few people who are welcoming the grid coming to the village and increasing the financial viability of microhydro. And this is something we have generally seen during the morning sessions where there seems to be a resistance to grid coming in and then a kind of a tendency to portray grid as something which is inferior to mini grids. And I think from a financial point of view, this is welcome. And people in the villages, be it productive use or households, they want reliable electricity at the lowest price points possible. And if grid can provide that, and if the mini hydro or solar grid can continue as a viable business model by supplying to the grid and the village, certainly something to look at. Now, there were very interesting points that Vikash made, and there was also a reference to financing. And in Sri Lanka, we've had DFCC Bank, which is a commercial bank. You borrow from the market, you do work with development financial institutions. And I was wondering when people were talking about it today and yesterday, of the need for local financial institutions to get involved. And here is a bank which has been financing mini hydro and solar for the last 20 years or so. And I would say some of the longest experience in financing hydros, solar, now rooftop solar, as I understand. Now, from your perspective as a financier, and this is a perspective we don't really have a lot in the audience and the panel today, what are the significant gaps that you see when you look at a mini hydro based grid which is coming to you for financing? So what if you were to put your finger on 2 or 3 major issues that you're seeing, not just in Sri Lanka, I know that you've been active in the region or beyond, so what would those be? I didn't introduce Kapila, who is the Vice President, and he also led the RERED and project, and also now you manage the ADB Solar Rooftops program. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. Before a bank finances a project, there are certain other things that should be in place. I mean, ideally, the demonstration impact. This is where the initial support from various donor agencies can come in. But thereafter, the institutional framework and the commercial viability is a must. I mean, a bank will look at before financing a project. So basically, it has to be a demand-driven, market-based facility where there has to be some sort of grant and subsidy assistance, but to a large extent, it has to be a promoter and the community-owned, community-developed project for it to be successful. And once these things are in place, for a bank to finance, of course, the bank should have the in-house capacity to assess. So that is where initially we also had problems in Sri Lanka, the initial in-house capacity. So this again is an area where the donors can assist, in the sense they have to identify at least 1 or 2 banks with the willingness, and then train them, and then bring in others as syndications and expand the finance delivery. And when it comes to financing, it's not just in isolation. You look at the debt service. It's an integrated approach where you will see the commercial viability. A very loosely, a bank will say if the machine runs, the promoters will pay. Yes, but for the machine to run, what is there? I mean, the proper resource assessment has to be done, then the technical competency of the promoters, then what sort of a commitment is there from the beneficiaries, and the consumer protection. So all this has to come in, and of course the equipment supplies. So the demonstration impact, as well as the institutional framework with support with various training and capacity building and approval facilities, standard documentation, all that will help for a bank to progress. Then, okay, the financial viability. Okay, so how much do they, the beneficiaries pay now for alternate users? Plus that, any productive use. So this is what the beneficiaries will be willing to pay. So that should be adequate to service the loan, and that is where the contribution from the promoter should come in for a project. So once all this is in place, comes the question that we have been discussing all through the morning. What if the grid arrives? So here you can only make a fair assessment depending on the country situation when the grid will arrive. No risk can be 100% eliminated. So in that case, it might as well a risk-free investment where no bank will be able to charge more than for a gifted security. They will not get a higher return. But the problem is when the grid arrives, most of the utilities are state-owned, so the tariff is subsidized. So this is where the private developers have the problem. So this is where the institution, the policy should be set in how well these can be integrated to the grid, and the bank will look at what is the incremental expenditure to upgrade this to be connected to the national grid. So basically, if time permits, we can discuss any of these matters in detail. But from the two presentations in Nepal and Myanmar, I would say the demonstration impact is already there. For the banks, I mean to check the track record of equipment suppliers, the technical promoters, as well as the resource assessments. These are already done. There are up and running projects to verify these. So then what are the problems? Maybe, especially in Myanmar, I suppose the in-house capacity of the banks. So that has to be developed. And again, this problem of what if the grid arrives? Yes, so that is a problem, issue. You have to discuss with the state agencies and to mitigate to whatever the extent possible. And then there will have to be certain documentation, standard documents, guidelines, where these things can be streamlined. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kapila. And again, just to revert back to Bikash, who thought that the grid arriving might actually be improving your finances. Have you had a case in Sri Lanka or elsewhere? You found that the arrival of the grid and then the additional utilization and increased cash flow did help the project?
Well, in most cases, if it is targeting a community initially, the project, I would say, will be under design, as you quite correctly said.
Yeah.
The resource may be able to generate more, but unfortunately, they will limit it to the requirements of that community, plus whatever economic activities that they feel that can be done in that region. But anticipating the grid to have a higher capacity at the initial inception stages will discourage the beneficiaries. Then they may fear, and also the financial institutions, then you're putting it to them, okay, the grid, we are expecting the grid, which may not come, but if it doesn't come, then what are you going to do with that excess electricity which is at a cost? But having said that, the incremental cost of increasing the capacity may be less, because anyway it's wasted energy.
Sure, excellent. And it's good that you went beyond the financial ratios, debt equity, debt service coverage, etc., into resource assessments, technical quality. But a very important point you made is about financial sector capacity building, letting the banks and others, training them to make sure that they understand hydro or mini grids, and so that they have an insight and understanding of where to look for, what are the issues, so that they can finance more. So this is something that we may come back and discuss also.
Fortunately for Sri Lanka, we had two development banks. So they took the initiative, and the commercial banks joined with them syndicated facilities. And earlier we insisted that all developers bringing a technically competent person as a partner, not as an employee, but as a partner with promoter share, so that they had a stake in the project.
Excellent. And who paid for this training? Was it a development agency or the banks?
Sorry?
Who paid for the training of...
Training and capacity building, that is where the grant assistance came.
Yes.
Yeah, that was initially required.
Okay, excellent. It's a very good use of grant to create that, as people are alluding to, like the ecosystem for financing, and that's very good indeed. We also, thanks very much, Kapila. We also have Senator Lasingdang from Malaysia. Apart from being a senator, he's had a long history of microhydro development with Tony Bloom. And we did hear about the productive end-use applications in Nepal and Myanmar. And I understand that you've had some very interesting examples of how to use hydro for productive use applications, and then to increase the financial viability of that. So if you could touch on what those productive uses were and how they've impacted on the viability of the hydro project and any other point of view. If I may also, now that you're in government, what is the first thing that a politician or a government person should be doing for supporting microhydro and mini-grids? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for allowing me to be part of this panel, and just sharing some of my experiences in developing all these community micro hydro systems that we try to promote in very remote areas in Malaysia. partly to initially it's to address the gap between the electrification systems that have been in place by the government. But we end up looking at how to sustain these systems, because how do you pay the operators and so on. And a lot of the discussion in this conference looking at sustainability of the system. So what we are trying to introduce, bring it in, is actually how to utilize the unused power, especially on microhydro, which normally ends up in just the ballast load and being wasted as energy. And also when it is in the context of Malaysia, it's not easy to get funding. And the only source of funding we have access to is CSR, corporate social responsibility, grants or funds that they. But when you work with corporate, they will try to ask you, how do you sustain this? And they always look at return of investment and all those kind of stuff. So we actually forced to actually build in these productive end users activities in our projects. So that's how we managed to put it in, so that we are looking at what are the existing resources and expertise within the village that can be utilized to create some sort of socio-economic spin-off from the systems that we have. So unfortunately, a lot of our communities are subsistence economy. They don't understand about what is money, investment, savings, and these are like not an easy concept to introduce to communities that have been hunter and gatherer. They never see money, they don't use money, and suddenly you are introducing a concept that is very alien to them. So these are very crucial points that it's not easy to just come up with like some financial ROI and which very alien to the community and start, this is how you need to do, now you need to pay a tariff at this cost, and they don't understand. Because water is free, how come I pay water? It's running free. So these are kind of understanding that we need to put in. And so our organization has to invest a lot of time in order to do and develop the hand-holding and also to guide the communities about how to do about it. So training is a very important component. And in order for us to train not just the communities but also some of the NGOs in Malaysia that is also doing this kind of activities. So yeah, there are a few crucial key points that when you come to a particular community, you have to scout for this. And I realized that there are three things that are very important. First, you have to look at this leadership within community. Also, there's somebody who's passionate about it. And also, we always put our radar on some local MacGyvers who is willing to take on and be part of the team that is going to sustain the system. So, if you look at it, I think I fairly can say a lot of the community-based renewable systems consists of 80% social engineering, and it's very important that engaging on this. So, looking at the last, I think the question was supposed to be what now that I'm in the government. So I think the most important crucial part is, at least for the context of Malaysia, is to have a very clear framework on community-based renewable energy systems. Because normally, if you look at any government, their framework is basically you look at needs, they look at the technology, they come up with tender, the contractor build it and say bye-bye. And normally that's create the whole white elephant system that you have seen strewn everywhere in part of the country. So thank you.
Yes. Thanks very much, and very insightful again. And now that we have a friend of renewables in the Senate, I'm hoping that someday in the future, IRENA could showcase Malaysia as a case where somebody who was running renewable energy projects went into the government, put in place an excellent framework to promote these systems. And we wish you luck with that. Thanks very much for that. I now go to Puni, Trimum Puni from IBECA. She's been an executive director there for as long as I can remember. And Puni, probably close to 100 microhydro systems. She's always stressed on the social enterprise aspect of it, lower returns but better social benefits. And that was also recognized in the Maxisay Award that she won maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Puni. And again, from your point of view, looking at, or rather, what would a social enterprise running microhydro look like? What are the aspects that needs to be considered? And how can we make it a bit more viable or bankable so that we can go beyond typical grants and softer CSR type financing to mainstream, look at banks like Kapilas in Indonesia, scale that up. So what are the ways in which we can graduate from the social enterprise to something which is a bit more mainstream and normally financeable?
Thank you, Vinu, and good afternoon, everybody. I will definitely talk really outside the mainstream, because there's so many mainstream in the world, and you can see the result is so big between the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. And this could be new wave that you'd like to introduce. I would like to give you an example that how we move from grant-driven development, which is the ownership is in a local community, and we ask them to have activities, livelihood that can make this sustainable, because then the community has enough fund to pay the electricity bill, so the operator can live properly. And this is what we usually do this for the last more than 25 years. But then when we started with 2.8 megawatt, maybe you knew it is very close to Cintamaka, the place that we have the existing power plant we built for public-private partnership, which we have 50% share. This 2.8 megawatt is what we want to do is we would like to find a soft loan, because we come to many banks. First is, this is back 5 years ago, we came to OKB Bank in Austria, because they are the one that are going to make the turbine. So the turbine for 2.8 megawatt made by Andrich is an Austrian company that we can implement using the facilities of credit export bank. Unfortunately, we found out that finally the turbine is made in India, even though Android, so we canceled because the OKB cannot give us support if the turbine is not made in Austria. Then we made several big developers who are really interested, because I'm telling them that the way we want to do in the scheme is completely new scheme. I said this is a democratization of economy, new wave. What we do is you put your money, and in 8 years' time, because we have a captive market, which is our utility, the money will be fully paid back, including the cost of money every day. But once the money is paid back, we want the local community owns this power plant. What happened is the Australian guy came in, and we have a very fruitful discussion, but at the end of the day, he said that in Pune, come on, we don't want to stay for 8 years. We want to stay for 3 years, then we would like to sell it to another entity, and, well, excuse me, I don't understand, Even though he's trying very hard to explain, but I said, no, we want private who would like to stay in the village, just sharing, give a share that they also have the right to enjoy the resources that is already there. But anyway, to make it short, the way I would like to make this feasible and viable economically is that we are promoting this with the hybrid system. Hybrid system means that I'm looking for, of course, CSR fund, which is still on the way, it's not successful yet, which come up from GDF Suez, with a total investment cost of €5 million. GDF Suez is eager to put 1 million euro. Then they said that it can be equity, can be soft loan, but they insist to have equity because at the end of the day, they want the money back by just giving like €1. It's just a goodwill of GDF Suez. Now they call it NG. Then because of that, we came to Paris many times, and even local Indonesians are interested. I'm sure that this is a long way to go, but it will get there. We will get there, even though it's already 4 to 5 years. And even just recently, we talked to the Islamic Development Bank as well. Now, what very important for us, the bottom line is that we have to find the private to understand that is your money will be paid back, but not in the term of commercial like 3 years or 5 years. Hydro is the best tools to empower and to increase the welfare of local community by utilizing the local resources. We call it reconnecting. This is one of the most powerful. If the government really can see very sharp, how this can be a tools to empower local community. I always say that poverty is only a symptom. The real root of poverty is because people are being disconnected with their own local resources. Our task is reconnecting. So this is need the government to be there, but also the private sector has to think a different way, and the banks should thinking not NPV and IRR. Whenever they ask me NPV, what is net present value? Value to whom? Those who already have the money to get more money, and then when they say IRR, internal rate of return. Return to whom? Return to those who already have the money. So this is the time for us to really change. The way have to be changed, that it's not only thinking of financial capital, but I would like to also put on more on social capital. How the local being empowered and understood that you have the right to utilize your own local resources, but it needs financial and technology. And of course, please ask those who have a heart, who also get the profit. This is what I call social enterprises, is working beyond profit and money. We get the profit, of course, but we also creating benefit. Like what Muhammad Dino said, we can be rich by making other people rich. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. And a lot of interesting financial sector points like lower returns, longer-term finance. You also introduced the concept of equity. And although you didn't say that, the model that you were suggesting was a build, operate, own, operate, and transfer model. And again, there seems to be a bit of a reluctance, probably compulsions of export credit, etc. And I was also, when you were speaking, I was also thinking that if the governments did create an environment where such social enterprises can be scaled up, it would have been much better. We could really connect community to local resources, and we can really do a lot more mini grids. So a lot of excellent thoughts there. And I now have the pleasure of introducing Rana, and also want to take a minute to introduce UNIDO, which is probably one of the most active organizations in microhydro globally. And we've had a lot of discussion about SDG 7 in the last couple of days or so. In some sense, the SDG 7 wouldn't exist if not for Dr. Kande Yumkela, who was the previous DG of UNIDO, and Rana and the rest of the team supported him and really raising the profile of energy, sustainable energy within the development goals also. So we're thankful to UNIDO for that. Rana heads the energy systems and infrastructure division at UNIDO, and we understand that UNIDO recently did a study of your experience with mini grids globally, and in particular hydro. And I was just wondering whether if you could share us some insights from that evaluation of the study that you did, in particular with financing or business or viability or so, if you would like to. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Bino, for that generous introduction. We see SDG 7 or energy as an enabler for industrialization. And as you said, we really place quite a lot of importance on mini hydro in our portfolio. So we have actually supported projects for the development of mini hydro in over 20 countries around the world, including Asia, but also primarily in Africa. We have also established, with the Chinese government, an international center for mini hydro, and this center really works as a hub for transferring knowledge, expertise, and also building capacities in Asia and also in Africa on mini hydro. One thing we also do to support the development of the sector is we publish regularly the mini hydro development report, which really looks into the stats of the development of the sector, the potential that still exists, and how much our country is really progressing. And I think one thing that struck me, especially from the session yesterday, the opening, where we had the floating solar and tracking the progress there. I mean, unfortunately, I think if we look into our report, which was published in 2016, we don't see a similar kind of uptake of mini hydro, I guess because maybe in some ways, people look more always into new technologies and really forget about the technologies that are really down there and very easy to implement. Now, yes, indeed, we have run a study on our work on mini-grids. The study focused on 8 countries, and in looking at the lessons learned, or deriving the lessons learned, we looked into 5 criteria, which have been echoed quite a lot in different panels, basically. The first criteria that we looked at is sufficient revenue generation for the operator of the mini-grid. The second one is community participation. The third is localizing the value chains, or local manufacturing. The capacity of the regulator to actually support the deployment of grids, and then also finally the willingness and ability of the consumers to actually pay for that electricity. And I'm sorry, but I have bad news. Actually, 50% of those projects were actually did not create sufficient revenues for the operators. Well, what I maybe forgot to say is that in most of these projects we work on a basis where we have grants from the global environment facilities, and these support the development. So I'm happy to hear what you said also about this. We need to shift away from that, and I think absolutely, if we want to achieve scale, that's why I think the lessons we've learned here are very important. I think on the side of the participation of the community, I think that's one of the main messages I want to bring, and that really relates to the mini hydro very well. Community participation does not need to be only in terms of the ownership of the mini grid. And in the case of mini hydro, we see that there's quite a lot of potential for people from the local community to be involved in different parts of the value chain. In fact, for 1 megawatt of hydro, there's the possibility to generate 25 to about 150 jobs locally for the building up, construction, but also the operation and the maintenance of that. And I think it's really by creating this local jobs for people around the mini-grid that we can see quite a development. Another interesting finding, because most of our projects are really focused on a productive use. So we really build the mini-grids around a productive use. So it can be a flour mill, it can be an olive oil production facility. I tend to talk about big things, but we're really talking about smaller things here. But that's often also not enough for creating the demand, because for you to operate the mini-grid sustainably, you need other sources, and that's where I think there is quite a lot of need to create other productive activities around, but also to create some awareness among the beneficiaries in the village on possible uses and services that can be promoted. So I think that's all from my side for now. Thanks.
Excellent, and very insightful. I have a better comprehension of numbers than general narratives, but like this number of 25 to 150 jobs by microhydro, also a bit not surprised, I would say good to see that number of 50% working. And you alluded to an important point that even if you focus on productive use, those productive uses which are available in the vicinity of the village, or that's not enough to make it commercially viable. And I believe today or earlier yesterday, people alluded to market linkages, trying to find opportunities to create new products and services, which then can be taken to market. So it raises a whole new idea about what those services could be, what is it can be marketed, can rural communities market their products to urban centers, etc. So those are some of those things that we may come back to. Last but not the least, I have the pleasure of introducing Gerhard Fischer. Gerhard probably has more experience than anyone on this panel on hydro, over 35 years, although he looks around 40, I must say. And that covers about 27 countries, I understand. And he's been living in the region for the last 7-8 years or so, heading the Hydro Competence Center of ASEAN, based in Bandung in Indonesia. Now, there was a lot of reference to issues around technical capabilities around feasibilities, and overall I would say the capability with developers, players in the ecosystem. So what are the key gaps that you see which is preventing the financial viability or bankability of hydro? And what are some good examples of how, in the context of Asia or elsewhere, how you or other organizations have addressed that? Over to you, Gerhard.
Okay, let me start maybe different than you expect. I think photovoltaic is not very complex and it's easy to implement on the end. Hydropower is still requiring a holistic, multidisciplinary approach to cover all the aspects from forest to village organization. And that cannot be eliminated. It's a system imminent thing. But of course it's also a very long-term investment. We, for example, run one power plant of a megawatt in Sumatra, 100 years old. It needed a little bit, was professionally built. It needed a small rehabilitation, can run another 100 years. And that, I think, is where the potential is there, is extremely good. But that means also, on the other hand, it's a big investment. It's like an elephant, and maybe other technologies are like a rat. So if you build a hydropower plant, it's really also requires the quality to run it. Of course, there are two options. If you don't have resources, maybe you go for low quality, but then you need them to maintain it. You need to repair it every now and then. And if you sum up your investments, you will lose by not having the quality. That's what I'm somehow convinced. And we, of course, try to somehow implement that. And I think also if we see rural development projects, maybe there are 100, 200 kilowatts. I think there is no way of not having the local capacity to, from A to Z, everything in the countries where it's used. Of course, some components like a generator can be imported, but I think, so that's why we build up these projects in Indonesia, quite successful over the old years with players like Uni, bringing the social aspects and also the technical aspects. So it plays together, and we should not forget that. So, of course, the advantage is so low operation costs of hydropower. There is no consumer that's on the end. And we always somehow compare also hydropower with diesel fuel, and we 5 cents, 5 cents. But 5 cents are not 5 cents, because diesel fuel, the money is left. And for the voltaics, the money left in Indonesia, it goes to, I don't know, photovoltaic panel controller things, maybe it's coming back again. But so this comparison is not correct. Also seeing the long-term investment coming back. In Switzerland, Germany, operations 120 years. Many families operate that, but in the economic calculations, it's not reflected. It's an E function. Everything more than 10 years is just nonsense to invest. So economists tell me, Erhard, why do you build a turbine running longer than 10 years? It doesn't calculate, because the net present value is nothing. So this know-how and also the requirement of good quality building, that's a fight which we fight, and that's why we also have these training centers, also to somehow see what is the achievement of the sector in these micro things. Alone in Indonesia, about 1,100 turbines and about 1,700 controllers have been built in Bandung. So they are somewhere. And I don't know how many operate, how not, but even I requested somebody said, yeah, is there a statistic how much is operational and not? We cannot follow that up somehow, but we know the know-how is there to get it running and so on. So, and if I see Nepal, Pakistan, Myanmar, all these countries is quite a big success story. In Myanmar, you build many things and you have the know-how to a certain degree. Maybe it would be better to help you more, to make it better, but problem is this is not reflected anymore. And so to make awareness for this long-term sustainability of this technology. Also, hydropower is one of the only technologies in renewable energy which is working together with nature, one-to-one. Maybe biomass similar, but so it's also have an environmental input, the catchment area preparation, maybe also making people aware to keep the rivers clean, not to pollute it. Things like that. There are many advantages which are not put into money. So, not to say, of course.
Yes,
but,
excellent points, and obviously about the competence and the local manufacturing, local benefits, including environmental benefits. Now, Gerhard, one thing is also we do, I mean, some of us engineers, it's a fault of ours, but we tend to focus a bit more on hydro-mechanical issues, electronic issues, etc. But hydro mini-grids or mini-grid is actually a business. So there must be enough importance given to training people on how to run a business. So Bill has run a business for the last 27 years. It also happens to be a hydro mini-grid. So is that a gap that you're finding, or is that something that you've had some experience where, or even, let me put it another way, is it possible to train somebody to become a businessman? Or is that something which is natural? You look for people who are entrepreneurs and then get them to run mini-grids and hydro. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a must on the end. Because we also have these village projects. We had a technical support unit running to build 140 sites in Indonesia. And one part, of course, was to implement an operational management in the village level, which is building up an enterprise. It's, at the end, it's a complete new project. Maybe the first real commercial enterprise can be inside a town. So they need a secretary, they need a bank account, they need forms to fill in, they need an internal audit, all these things we try to get there. We even explained them the requirement of having a tariff. By having a small model, we say, okay, what is the expectation of your salary as an operator? This. And what is the tariff? This. And then the spreadsheet either show you are going down the bottom, you are going up, or somehow playing. And then they start, it's true, if I don't want to pay the electricity and this guy wants a high salary. So then you start even putting the requirement, even hydropower is long term, depending on the quality of the equipment. After 5 years you have a problem, after 20 years, after 100 years. But that's also the initial investment and quality of your work is also giving the long-term requirements of pushing more money in later. So I'm tending to put it now, make it properly, run it, maintain it, and you don't have any problem which you have to solve on the social way, on the social side. If after 1 year, 3 belts gone, thing is gone, generator burned, of course you have a social problem of 80%, but 80% of what? So that's why I'm always fighting it, even engineering also it's not so important, but in hydropower there is no way around. Huh?
Yeah.
And of course, engineering, if you have a workshop 1 kilometer beside the site, okay,
Yes.
no problem. Huh?
So yeah,
You know what
so
I mean?
engineers are still
Yeah.
just, but also Jahad touched upon local enterprises, jobs, etc. And Rana, I believe UNIDO does focus on SMEs and job creation. And do you see renewables and in particular micro hydro as something which, from a enterprise point of view, job creation point of view, local economy point of view, is that something which you think is a priority? And is there any good examples of how we have worked in a particular country or a situation to create a manufacturing locally sustainable system that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I think it's a very big potential, have it, yeah. We already had some 2 projects with UNIDO, one in Nigeria, one in Tanzania. So we made a technology transfer for the turbine technology itself, combined with some training about from feasibility study to all these aspects I said. So it was maybe 4 weeks in Bandung in our center. And we also had a workshop. They built their own turbine there. So for the first project, they just built the turbine together with them, send it to them, and they had an example. They can implement it without having this technology problem. Also controllers from Indonesia. So I think that was quite a good thing. And what comes out of it, of course, needs time. Yeah?
Yep.
So they need time and projects. Yeah? So if they don't have a project, I will forget the know-how. So, but the market is there and everything. Yeah. So.
Excellent. So, Rana, would you like to build on
Thanks
that?
for speaking to us on that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's an area where we certainly put a lot of emphasis as well. So, and we look at it in 2 ways really. One is how to support an innovation ecosystem around renewable energy, irrespective of what technology it is, but how to create an innovation ecosystem and help actually accelerate some of the innovative ideas that are coming up by local entrepreneurs finding really good homegrown solutions for energy problems, be it energy efficiency, renewables, and then helping them really put their business plans and taking the first steps to bringing their solutions to the market and growing their businesses. So that's one angle. And the other one is the non-innovative, as dull as that sounds, but that's basically just working on the localization of the value chain. So we really look into mapping what are the niches in the local market for different parts of the product development, and then working with local manufacturers on improving their capacity to manufacture high quality products. And of course, in some ways as well, working with local testing or regional testing facilities to support, because for you to produce locally, you also need to make sure that you're fulfilling the quality standards, and for that you need to have the quality infrastructure behind testing that. So these are the 2 ways in which we actually support and promote that.
Excellent. And, again, the quality aspect and need to have quality to ensure long-term superior technical performance comes out. But also, Kapila, because beyond project finance, we also opened up this issue around enterprise finance, probably manufacturing enterprise, so probably even larger enterprises using franchise models for mini grids also. So is there a good model for enterprise financing? Puni alluded to equity financing. So going beyond debt finance, project finance, are there models which have been used to probably in the going beyond venture capital, but from commercial, going beyond angel financing, probably commercial venture capital? Are there experiences that you can share in enterprise financing?
Well, in certainly projects, we are looking at things like, I would say, issuing debentures, where, I mean, even the utility, or even a utility may even issue debentures for I would say an isolated pocket, where they can say, okay, within the next 10 years or so, this is mature, then to raise funds for a specific project. So that sort of models have been looked at. So if the utility is state-owned, some sort of government guarantees also will be there. But from a bank's point of view, a bank will always look for the commitment of the promoters, in the sense that, okay, there is some contribution from them so that they are fully committed to the project. Of course, from social point of view, yes, the beneficiaries are there, but as we discussed earlier, what if the breeder right? So the state utility may provide the same service at a cheaper cost. Then what are we to do?
So again, when you look at the enterprise, it falls to the commitment, the skills of the entrepreneur, and their ability to take the business forward. Whereas on one hand, we hear that engineering is important. Now, there seems to be a sort of like 2 points of view emerging, Bikash, of focusing more on the technical quality and also focusing more on the entrepreneur. And now, how do we just give it to you in a second? Now, how do we bring these two together, create something which can be scalable? Because there is a fair amount of subjectivity here. So if we really need to focus more on the quality and the entrepreneurship skill of the businessman, as opposed to creating a system which can be scalable. So there seems to be a kind of a challenge. Kapila, would you like to add to anything which I said?
Well, yeah, from bank's point of view, a technical assessment is a must.
Yes.
I mean, because this is where the collateral comes in. So always it should be from the cash flow base. To make it cash flow based, the proper technical feasibility, the quality of power generation is a must, I would say.
So all things being equal, assuming that all those boxes, technical feasibility, resource assessments, risks in terms of utility, encroachment, etc., are sorted out, what might tilt the decision-making point would probably be the quality of the entrepreneur or the enterprise.
Mostly, I would say the technical assessment.
Okay.
It's the technical assessment. But I mean, because the thing is this, usually a bank will take the escrow accounts, the shares of that company, the project documents as collateral. I mean, project assets per se is useless if the project is not functioning.
Okay.
So basically, at least to give it to someone else as a going concern, the technical feasibility is a must, I would say.
So again, to revert that, Bikash, then is there a way to look more at an enterprise financing rather than looking at project by project, looking at the technical feasibility, techno-economics? Is there a way to scale that up more as an enterprise level using franchise models or other models also? Is there a different way to look at that?
I mean, so far, because microhydro really depends on local resources and it's very site specific, there haven't been, to my knowledge, good models for, sort of having the same thing rolled out. One of the advantages of some of the other technologies like solar and other types of things, is that you can have a standard design. I think though that time has come where some of these new technologies for metering, where somebody remotely can monitor several systems, one company can own 10 microhydro in a particular area. I think the time for that has come, and I think this is one of the other reasons why microhydro is not attracting that much, in terms of, although it is the largest renewable energy mini-grid subsector. If you look at the new technologies that are now available and rapidly changing, particularly in terms of smart metering, that hasn't made its way into microhydro yet. And it needs it because there's all this surplus energy that could be marketed so much better. So, yeah.
Yes.
So I think that's where the opportunity comes in, coupled with new technologies to aggregate and manage several of these units at the same time. I think it's possible.
So, all right. Do I have time for taking one or two questions from the audience?
Maybe just about, we need to start the other in about 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, if you would allow me, I'll take at least one question from, it's unfair for people who have waited here. So is there anyone with a really pressing question? We have an excellent set of panelists here, and you don't normally get this density of expertise in many panels. So is there a pressing question? Yes, sir.
I was wondering if something is being done, something is being done on velocity turbines and funding them. These are some of the new coming areas in small hydro, micro hydro. They range in 5 to 10 kilowatt and work on mainly on velocity of water. Any activity being done on that or financing being done on that?
Yeah, yes.
It was maybe 30 years ago I was involved in this flow things. And my personal opinion after all this, also knowing that there are developments, it's quite difficult to handle such a thing in a river. Because we have tropical rivers, we have trees coming down, so to protect it is exceptional, maybe in irrigation channels or very clean environments possibly there. But I don't see this, we make studies on it, it's not really
Not
what I would
really big
support. So
yeah.
of course there are solutions there, but they are exceptional. You cannot, and even if a river have that size and the speed, there are no people living here. Because in the wet season maybe it's flooded, and so I think it's quite difficult. Maybe in the ocean streams there are some things, even down there, that to use like a wind turbine, things like that are developed also in Stuttgart. I can give you the address who is developing this in South Korea. They build a windmill under the water. So there are
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So there are possibilities, and I encourage the Indian government to continue this discussion. And it's quite possible that institutions like UNIDO could play a facilitating role in these discussions, but very important question. So it's very difficult to try and control this whole wealth of information, but I think we did hear that there is an opportunity for cross-fertilization from what's happening in the solar, which has really been solar mini-grids, which has really been growing. But there are a number of positives on the hydro side, environmental benefits, social enterprise benefits, linkage to natural endowments and ecosystems, and also very important linkage to indigenous communities and others who would not really have an opportunity to develop except for hydropower. So there is a lot of opportunity that I see of cross-fertilization, and I do hope organizations like IRENA, UNIDO, others could facilitate that. We completely run out of time, and the organizers are really impatient, but it would be very unfair if we don't really thank the panelists for their excellent interventions. So please join me in giving them a hand for their